Hi, everyone. Welcome to the introduction to Unit 3. As I think you've already gathered, this unit will focus on social constructionist and incoherence theories. This is an introduction to the unit. You should have already watched the video, actually, the two videos of the three pigs. That should have given you an introduction to in particular, what the notion of incoherence theories may be about, specifically post-structuralism. Although in this presentation, I'm going to be introducing you to both critical theories and post-structuralist theories. Do note that I have the same cold that probably half of you all have had. So I apologize if I sound stuffy or otherwise a little bit, I don't know, out of sorts. So my primary purpose here is going to be to rehash a little bit of correspondence theories and coherence theories and some of the basic assumptions that underlie those theories. And then we'll move into incoherence and social constructionist theories, including critical social science and post-structuralism. I am also going to just introduce you to some of the primary thinkers or theorists and literacy researchers who have grounded their work in some of these theories. So let's take a look at just a little review of correspondence theories. So as you know, and I'm going to be using this same example of the cow because, why not just run with that for consistency's sake? So as we know from a correspondence theory perspective, the idea is that everybody would recognize a cow as a certain thing, that a cow is a ruminant, a large herbivore, a mammal, it says moo, it's a farm animal, etc., and also a good source of protein. And if one person says, oh, hey, look, that's a cow, another person would say, yep, that's a cow, all right. Now, with coherence theories, the difference is that would just be one understanding of a cow that would cohere with certain ways of viewing the world. And so somebody might say, yeah, that makes sense, that a cow is a large herbivore, a high source of protein, a ruminant, a farm animal, and it says moo. But somebody from another worldview, or who has a different worldview and maybe from a different cultural context, might say, no, not so much. Rather, what would make sense to them is that a cow might be, it might be written completely differently in a different alphabet entirely or writing system, that the cow is the highest form of life. You would never eat a cow. That a cow is the ultimate in reincarnation and a form of divinity and a higher caste. So again, this is very basic, but it's an overview of sort of the difference between coherence and correspondence. The idea here is that something makes sense if it coheres with your worldview. Now, so again, these basic assumptions then are that from a coherence perspective, and specifically thinking about constructivist theories, the idea is that meaning is somewhat subjective, that meaning is dependent on the meaning as well as, again, our own worldviews. And that um, coherence theories and coherence theorists are really concerned with how we make sense of things. So rather than with correspondence theories, and the idea being that we want to know if an answer corresponds to, we will want to know if someone's meaning making or their answer to a question corresponds to an objective reality. We would want to know how people are making sense of things, and what perspective they may be coming from. With regard to literacy, teaching, and learning, we would say from a coherence perspective that a reader understands the text if it makes sense or fits with her prior understandings and experiences, with her community and cultural funds of knowledge, and that a writer's spelling should make sense with given what he or she knows about letters and sounds, right? So again, that's just a review of coherence theories. Now, incoherence theories, actually, not everyone refers to social constructionist and critical theories as incoherence, but I'm really that's also just a little bit funny because I know when I was first exposed to post-structuralism, um, I just always laughed at it because it didn't seem to make sense to me. Like it was incoherent to me. And I think a lot of people feel that way. Um, I think one point about social constructionist theories, critical theories, post-structuralism is not that they're incoherent in and of themselves. In fact, to a large extent, they would embrace many of the assumptions and assertions of coherence theories. But I think that they would also take an extra step to question and disrupt um, assumptions embedded in both coherence theories and correspondence theories. So with these theories, social constructionist theories, and note the difference between constructivist and constructionist. This is discussed a little bit in chapter 5. But there's still an assumption that knowledge or meaning making is subjective, right? And that meaning is dependent on the meaning maker. However, there's also a recognition that meaning is power laden and that some meanings are deemed more coherent than others, and some understandings or views of the world or meanings might be disregarded entirely. So, a goal is, in addition to sort of understanding how we make sense of texts, um, those who operate from social constructionist and incoherence theories are also seeking to question and disrupt dominant power structure. God, I can't even speak today. Dominant power structures and ways of viewing the world. So, from this sense, social constructionist theories or incoherence theories are influenced by both critical social science and post-structuralism. So, critical social scientists, and you may have heard like critical literacy or critical theory before. This is sort of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about critical social science. Critical social scientists would question the social and power structures that privilege some groups of people and exclude others. If any of you are familiar with Marxist theory, that a lot of critical social science is grounded in Marxist theory. Although I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that in this class. Um, Post-structuralism is similar to critical social science in that it's questioning dominant power structures, but it also actively seeks to disrupt those ways of viewing the world. And I would also add that those who operate from post-structuralist viewpoints are also attempting to perhaps reconstruct meanings in alternative ways. So let's go on and take a look at what this might look like um, in terms of the example of a cow. So we've got the whole, idea that a cow could be a large herbivore, a mammal, a ruminant, etc. And we also have this view. So remember that incoherence theories don't reject coherence theories, but rather they would take them a step further and begin to question them and some of the power relationships that might value some perspectives or worldviews or coherent systems over others. So, for example, in somebody who's operating from incoherence or social constructionist perspectives would probably recognize that, yeah, for some people, a cow is a ruminant, a farm animal, a large herbivore, etc., and that others would say, yeah, that it's the highest form of reincarnation. It's a higher caste. You'd never eat it, etc., etc. but they would also begin to recognize that, well, that's the one, this view that at least within the US context, that tends to go into the textbooks, right? That has garnered some cultural dominance within a context such as the United States. So they would say, yeah, that's what's actually in the textbook. Now, actually, let me go back to that for a second. Um, and that's the idea here is that when you're recognizing that both of these systems may cohere within themselves, the social constructionist would say, okay, yeah, but it's not all there. These two different systems aren't always viewed equally, right? So the idea here, particularly from critical perspectives, is that you're pointing out inequity. So, from a critical social science perspective, questions will be asked, such as, why is that the only way it's presented in the textbook? They might say, hey, that's not fair, right? So, really pointing out fairness and what seems just and asking some of these critical questions. So, for those of you who are sort of well versed in social justice education, that's largely grounded in critical social science. So, oh, sorry, and another bubble there. Another question that they might ask is who decided to do it that way, right? Who is making the decisions? How does the system work? These kinds of questions about how the system works gets into post-structuralism, because part of post-structuralism is deconstruction, right? Picking apart why the system works that way and deconstructing some of these power relationships. Now, post-structuralism is also going to intentionally try to disrupt any of these views about cows and how we would understand cows. So, to link back to the three pigs and the version that you saw of David Wiesner, with these cows sort of jumping out of the book and really disrupting our whole notion of who the victim is, right? Who, what a book even is, how you might even read a book. Like, how can you read a book when the letters are just falling off the page, right? That's very disruptive and deconstructive. And so if we were to follow that line of thinking with regard to a cow, we might get something like this. And you might think, wow, that sort of disrupts our dominant understandings of what cows are and what they do. And I would say that this image right here could disrupt either of the two understandings and systems of understanding cows that I illustrated with respect to correspondence theories and coherence theories. So somebody seeing this might say, well, that's different. And it might cause them to question, what does this say about cows and about people and about my whole way of understanding cows and people and about dominant structures for understanding cows and people? So that's sort of how post-structuralism might be represented here in ways that not only question equity or whose understandings of cows matter or get taken up in textbooks or what have you, but also really trying to um, throw a wrench in the gears, right? About and really getting us to question interpretations, any interpretations, including our own interpretations. So one thing that social constructionists and particularly post-structuralists will often do is to, rather than presenting this as the new way in which we would interpret cows or understand cows, they would actually question this just as much as they might question some of the other representations of cows. So, when we're talking about literacy, we're really talking about questioning dominant interpretations of dominant representations of textual meanings, and questioning, whose interests are privileged within a given text, and also just engaging with and reading and writing texts as David Wiesner did in ways that will really try to disrupt dominant understandings. So, if we're thinking about the kinds of theories you're going to be reading about in chapter 5, there are several of them. And I can't claim that the social constructionist theories that I've included have are cover the bases. There are theories such as feminist theories and Bourdieu's social practice theory that I have not included, and you may have heard of these. And so, you may be wondering why they're not in there, and it's really just in the interest of space. But you're going to be reading about several different theories, including critical literacy theory, new literacy studies. Let's see, what else? Critical sociocultural theory, multiliteracies and new literacies theory. And you'll also be reading about critical race theory. Um, as you do this, you will be encountering some of the following teachers and researchers and theorists. So Vivian Vasquez is well known in the field of critical literacy, and her background is as a pre-K teacher. And so she has done a lot of writing about critical literacy practices and critical literacy theory in early childhood classrooms. Paulo Freire is another theorist who you're going to be reading about when you read about critical literacy. He's the bearded guy right there, and he's sort of known as, sort of a father of critical theory and critical literacy theory. And he did his work largely in Brazil, and working with in adult literacy and working with um, working class and poor adults and teaching them how to read, but teaching them how to read using some of their own experiences, reading and writing their own worlds and their experiences of marginalization and poverty. When you read the grounding curricular framework or curriculum for chapter 5, you're going to be reading about participatory action research, and Valerie Kinloch's work is very foundational in that area. And she has and so you'll be reading about her work. I think she is now the Dean of the College of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. Let's see. And she's worked, I think, in Harlem and other communities doing participatory action research. So actually researching communities in critical ways with youth. You might also see reference to Michel Foucault in some of the things you read. He is sort of well known for work in post-structuralist theory and deconstruction, and for theorizing about the relationships between knowledge and how we know and what we know, and power, what knowledge and ways of knowing are deemed coherent. Alan Luke's work is very seminal in the areas of multi-literacies and digital literacies, and sort of how we think about changing literacy in new times in which literacy practices, including digital technologies, are rapidly changing. He also co-authored I don't know if it's foundational, but a well-known model of critical literacy, which is called the Four Resources model. So you'll probably run into his name as well. David Kirkland, I'm not sure actually if you'll run into his work a whole lot in my book, but his work, and actually he might have been referenced in chapter 4 with regard to sociolinguistic theory, but he's also well known in the area of critical race theory. And his work has involved researching the literacy practices of young African American boys and men, in particular adolescent African American men, and looking at hip hop literacies. So if you have any interest in that, I would really strongly encourage you to seek out his work. His work is just fantastic, and he's engaged in urban literacy projects at, I think, at New York University, yeah, NYU. Finally, Marcel Haddix. She's a professor of English education at Syracuse University, and she is also the president-elect of the Literacy Research Association. She is well known in the area of well, many of the theories actually that you will be reading about in chapter 5. And she also wrote an inset about, I think, about Black feminist theories. That's an area in which she's written a lot. She also does a lot of work in the area of discourse analysis, teacher identities, and literacy. And yeah, so that's Marcel Haddix. I hope this gives you a little bit of a, sometimes it's just nice to see a face that goes along with some of the names and people you're reading about. There are a whole bunch more that I could have added here, but I think that's all for now. Hopefully this has given you a solid introduction to the theories in chapter 5. I will tell you that these theories get to just be, I guess that many of the things that you're going to see and read about in this chapter may not be as familiar to you because we don't see them as often in classroom practices. Um, at least we don't see as many classroom practices and curricula that are informed by social constructionist theories. Um, so because of that, and because of some of the terminology, it can be a little bit harder to wrap our brains around some of these theories. I know that I certainly still struggle with them, particularly when we're talking about post-structuralism and critical race theory and things like that. So please don't assume that I have my brain fully wrapped around all of these things. When I wrote this book, I got to spend a lot of time reading and writing drafts and revising them. And so I guess I just wanted to say that. I'm not expecting you to be able to talk about all of these theories, whether they're in chapters 2, 3, 4, or 5, to be able to talk about them really, really fluently. At this point, and as you begin to work on your paper, your short theoretical paper, you're going to have time to think about your thinking as you write. And I really, my goal at this point is that I have just exposed you to a really broad array of theories. When we move on to the next part of this course, we're going to be delving into classroom practices and going back to all of these different theories to think some more about them. Um, so yeah, I know that these theories can seem a little bit overwhelming and intimidating if you're not used to thinking about them. But I hope you will jump in with gusto, and I'll enjoy reading your forum discussions about these theories. See ya!